And welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the one. This is our Fujifilm calls it's 50mm F1.0, the fastest, meaning with the widest aperture autofocus lens currently available in the market. And I've been willing to try this lens for quite a long time. Actually, I've been willing to try this lens since day one, but I've never had a way to justify its purchase because again, it's not a cheap lens. And I could finally try this lens thanks to the awesome folks at RCE Photo, which is the biggest digital used market in Italy, which is also expanding in Europe. And it's a partner of this channel because they already sent me a lot of stuff to try out, and I always found their service, even from a selling standpoint, to be on point, perfect. I actually cannot recommend these guys more when it comes to use things. And thanks to them again, because they sent me this lens to try. I already returned the lens because I wanted to get the most out of the lens for the time that I had it, but I could use it for like 15 days. And before we talk about the lens and all of the things about this lens, let me show you a few shots that I take with this lens for what this lens was born for. Now, as you've seen, this lens is capable of producing great pictures, but we'll talk about image quality in just a bit. As you probably all know, this is, again, the fastest, meaning the widest aperture autofocus lens that you can currently buy, I think, in any manufacturer's lineup. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. And when this lens came out, there were a lot of expectations. Probably just to give you a little bit of a history on this, this should have been a 33mm 1.0, and then it got swapped for a 50mm 1.0. Fuji declared, if I'm not wrong, that this was due to the difficulty of creating a wider field of view with an f1.0 aperture. And so this lens became from a normal lens to a mid-range telephoto lens for portrait use. And this lens has a lot of competition if you look at the Fujifilm lenses available in the market, and also third-party lenses that are currently coming up now that Fujifilm opened its protocol to third-party manufacturer. This lens, as you probably know, if you've watched any of the reviews already out, had mixed reactions when it got launched, because some reviewers said that this was a great lens, others were not so convinced about it, and the peer review went for a bold claim that this was the worst lens of 2021 or 2020. For maybe 2020, I don't remember when it was launched, which I think it was a little bit of it was a little bit provocatory more than an actual claim on its own. Now, as I said, I've been willing to try this lens, and now that I had the privilege to use this lens, I may be a little bit biased toward the lens, but as usual, my review is going to be as honest as it gets, at least based on what I can do, in telling you the good, the bad, and the ugly about this lens. And at the end, whether it's worth its high price tag, $1,500, or not. But without any further ado, let's just dive into the actual review. From a construction standpoint, there's not much to say. If you look at the lens, it's huge, it's humongous. Compared to all the other Fujifilm lenses, at least in the primes, normal range lineup, this is by far the biggest, the heaviest, because it's 845 grams. For comparison, the new 56 is 445 grams, if I'm not wrong. So it's almost double the weight and more than double the size. And it's all metal built, it's weather sealed. The aperture, there's 9 aperture blades for better bokeh. It is very sturdy. There's nothing you can complain about the build quality itself. It's got a 77mm front thread, which is unusual for Fujifilm lenses. Of course, if you start talking about the 200mm f2 and all of that, it's a different line of lenses. But for normal focal lengths, this is way bigger and heavier than your usual Fujifilm lens. The minimum focus distance is 70 centimeters, and we're going to talk about that in a bit when we talk about image quality and also in the conclusions. And it's got the aperture ring like we all have been used to with Fuji, but again, Fujifilm tends to make these aperture rings a little bit too loose. I wouldn't have mind for it to be a little bit stiffer. But in general, it's a very solid lens, premium build quality, and if I had to complain about something, it's even too premium because of the weight and the size. But let's talk about image quality, because a lens like this, with its size, its weight, its cost, makes sense only based on its image quality. Because if the image quality sucks, there's no reason to buy this lens. If the image quality justify all of the size, weight, and cost, then this lens kind of make some sense. And we're gonna test. I tested this lens on the new 40 megapixel sensor of the XH2. As you've seen in my initial slideshow, this lens is capable of producing great pictures. But we're gonna get into how to get the most out of this lens once we start talking about sharpness and all of that. And let's start with sharpness. Again, this is on a 40 megapixel sensor. On a 26 megapixel sensor, is going to be more forgiving. But on the highest megapixel sensor, we're going to get the lens out of its comfort zone. Although this lens, if I'm not wrong, is mentioned among those that are going to perform well on the 40 megapixel sensor. Now, starting from f1.0, you can immediately tell that in general the image is not super sharp. The center is decent, but the contrast is very low, and the corners are weak. There's no going around it, and the lens shows a lot of chromatic aberration in the high contrast areas. This is a lot of chromatic aberrations compared to the more modern lenses that you get from Fuji. And from if you look at it, it's a f1.0 lens. These lenses have to usually, as always, lenses like this bright have always had this kind of issue when it comes to fringing and chromatic aberration and all of that. So it was to be expected somehow. The vignetting is there, but it's nothing crazy. You can easily correct it. And personally, I don't think you should correct it, because for what this lens is built for, which is portraits, that vignetting doesn't bother me at all. When you stop down to f1.4, the overall contrast already improves a lot. The sharpness improves a lot also in the center, while corners remain a little bit behind, and there's a huge improvement in vignetting. The sharpness in the center becomes great starting from f2, actually from f1.8, because the vast majority of the shots that you've seen before was on f1.8. But let's say f2, and there you see a lot of sharpness coming out, and the corners at f2 start to become usable, and vignetting at f2 is almost gone. At f2.8, the lens become razor sharp in the center, and corner become very good, while vignetting is gone at all completely. And when you get to f4, by f4 you get the most out of this lens. It's razor sharp corner to corner, and vignetting is gone. Pretty much everything works perfectly when you work at f4, and this keeps going at f5.6, f8. While at f11 you get some diffraction starting to compromise the image quality, and f16 the diffraction is quite a lot. But again, on a 40 megapixel sensor, this was to be expected. So from a sharpness standpoint, the lens is definitely capable of resolving the 40 megapixels, but this is not true if you're talking about using it wide open. And we'll get to that in a bit, because this is a consideration that you have to make. Chromatic aberration are pretty strong, especially at the widest aperture. And it's not that easy to correct either, because it's everywhere. It's basically everywhere. The bokeh is great. Don't get me wrong. It's very pleasing. The 9 blades definitely help here across the aperture range. And one thing that you need to consider is that even the lens already, the minimum focusing distance is 70 centimeters. Now, for a portrait lens, this is quite a bit challenging. Sometimes you want to get close. And one thing that makes this worse is that when you're shooting at the basically close to the minimum focusing distance, the lens loses sharpness. You basically have to stop down to f2.8 to have a sharp image when you're very up close to your subject. This is something to keep in mind, because this is a 50 millimeter, it's not a 56, and you may think that 50 to 56 is it's not a big difference, and it's not, but in full frame terms you're going to get a 75 versus an 85, and you'll be basically, sometimes if you want to go for a just headshot, you're better off with a 90 millimeters, of course. But if you don't have it, you're going to use the lens that you have, in this case the 50, and you want to get close, and you need to know that when you're that close to the minimum focusing distance, the lens doesn't perform at its best at all. Also, considering the overall behavior of the lens, if you're planning on shooting wide open or at wide apertures, let's say between f1 and f2.8, f2, let's just say f2, no, even f2.8, you need to make sure that your subject is placed in the center of the frame. This is because corners only get sharp at f2.8, as we said, and if you're placing like the eye of your subject close to the border of the image, then your subject is going to have its eyes sharp enough. Again, it's something to be expected with such an extreme wide aperture, but it's something that also you need to keep in mind when you're shooting, because it may affect your final result. When it comes to autofocus, this lens is huge. It's got a lot of glass, and it has to move a lot of stuff. So lenses like this, super wide aperture, tend to be not the fastest around, just because of that, the amount of glass that they have to move, and the fact that they are not like at their best when they're wide open. So this lens is no exception. The autofocus is good. On the X-H2, the autofocus is good. It's decently fast, it's decently accurate, but it's definitely slower than other modern lenses. And again, this is something you could expect from such a huge and extreme lens. As far as reliability goes, when using tracking, this lens is pretty accurate as long as your subject is in the center of the frame. If you start putting your subject around the edges of the frame and you're shooting wide open, results aren't great. I've found several shots where between the autofocus and the optical formula of the lens, a subject that was placed at the corners wasn't sharp enough. Again, something to keep in mind. The subject tracking works, but because of the amount of glass that has to move, it can't keep up with fast movement. So there's no way it's gonna compete with newer linear model lenses like the 33 or 8018 or something like that. There's no comparison, and you should not expect to be able to track a dog running at you with a lens like this. It's not going to happen. For this specific review, I won't be talking about video that much because I haven't used it for video, and I think this is more of a photography lens, which was born for portraits, and that's where you're going to use it. I don't see shooting with this lens like a wedding with the F1 lens. Probably is going to use the 56 F1.2, I would say, for both portability and autofocus and all of that. But we'll talk about that later. But on a positive note, this lens doesn't have any focus breathing, which is, again, if you want to use it for video, it's something to keep in mind. You don't have to worry about focus breathing at all. Bottom line, when it comes to autofocus, the performance is decent, but it's nothing to write home about. In conclusion, I was really pleased with what I got from this lens in the shooting sessions that I did, especially when I stopped it down a little bit to f1.8 or so. Its size and its weight and its cost makes you think twice when you have to purchase it, and also if you have it, if you have to lug it around, because with the room and the weight that this object takes in your backpack, you can bring two very good lenses, such as, I don't know, the 56 1.2 and the 18mm, and you got spare room and weight. So it is a very specific lens that has just a very specific use, which to me is portraiture, and I wouldn't even say it needs to be in a controlled light environment. This lens cannot manage those situations where the light is too strong and it's hitting very reflective objects and all of that, because of the chromatic aberration. So I see this lens as a very competent studio portrait lens. For that work, this lens is going to get you incredible look, incredible results, and it's going to be very good for what you need. It's definitely not a lens, a portable lens. You will not lug it around, and you really need to love the look of this lens to justify its purchase, because let's be clear, there's a lot of other alternatives around now, especially now that Fuji opened up its protocol to other lenses, and you may be thinking, is it the best option for me right now? I guess the biggest of the doubts is, should I pick this 50mm f1.0 or the new 56 f1.2? Should I save money and get the old 56mm instead of both of them? I will answer that question. Don't get me wrong. I will answer the question, but you need to subscribe, because next week I'm gonna push out a comparison video between the old 56, the new 56, and the 50mm f1.0 to help you decide what works best for what you have to do. Because I already know what works best for me, and I'll tell you at the end of the next video. But your needs may differ from mine, and that video is going to be meant to discuss the various possibilities that we have. So as I said, make sure you subscribe. I definitely loved using this lens, and if you're after a very capable studio lens that can shoot even at f1.0 or something like that, and you don't mind the size and the weight and the price, I can definitely recommend this lens. But mind you, this is not a lens for everybody. This is a very specific lens. If you want a lens that you want to carry around, you may have better options. But again, this is going to be for next week. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, leave me a like, leave me your comments. Let me know what do you think about the pictures. Let me know what you think about the lens. Let me know if you have tried the lens and if you have any idea, any opinion on this lens, if you were pleased with it, if you hated it, if you loved it, and so on. Comments are down below, and I'm only waiting for yours to answer to those and comment on my own. That's it for today. Ciao, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.